Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to Eoin Hinchy, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Tynes, and we're going to be talking about how security tasks can be automated in a fairly simple and apparently a codeless manner. But before we do that, let's welcome Eoin. Eoin, how are you today?
Mark, how are you? It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. We were just talking before we hit the record button that for me, I'm just getting going at 7 a.m. here, and for you, it's what time is it?
It's 3 p.m. here in Dublin, in Ireland, on a particularly bright, sunny, blue sky day. So all's well here. What's the weather like for you, man?
I'm in Seattle, and our weather's is as probably typically Irish. It's cloudy, rainy, dark. I mean, we wake up in the dark, we go to bed in the dark. It's just yeah, we have about 6 weeks of nice weather if you come here in August, and that's about it. But
funnily enough, I used to when I worked for my previous company, I had a team that reported to me out in Seattle. So I spent a bunch of time in Seattle, like maybe every 8 weeks I was in Seattle. And I was always struck by how similar it was to Dublin in Ireland, funnily enough, both in terms of weather, but also in terms of like just the culture people had, the attitudes people had to work-life balance. It was always a city that I felt unusually home in, despite the fact that it was the complete other side of the world.
that's very interesting. So were you in Seattle or Bellevue?
So I was in Seattle, downtown Seattle. So the company I was working for was called DocuSign, who had DocuSign. So we had a big office right there by Pike Market. Yeah. And it was a great place, man. We've actually got a couple of customers in Bellevue though, so I have spent some time in Bellevue as well. And yeah, but both really great places, and I'm sorry I don't get to go spend as much time out there, both because of the pandemic, but also just because we're headquartered here in Dublin.
Sure. Well, and I asked Bellevue because typically people come in from Microsoft. They are we got Microsoft over here and Amazon downtown, but then of course there's a bunch of others, DocuSign being one of them. One more question, kind of off topic before we jump into the topic of the day. You mentioned the cultural similarities. Can you expand on that a bit?
Oh, totally. So one of the things that I thought was very similar to Dublin and Seattle was this kind of like post-work pub scene. So this idea that like, hey, we've all finished work. It's like 6 p.m. We've worked really, really hard. Let's go and have a couple of drinks, or let's go grab a meal before we head home to our families. And that doesn't exist in like every city you go to, right? It's particularly pronounced, I think, in Dublin and in Seattle. And the amount of choice that somebody has when they're engaged in that kind of like post-work activity is awe-inspiring in Seattle, right? There's just so many different restaurants, so many different pubs, so many great places to see, and it's all at a pretty high standard, right? There's very few places I've been to, at least in my experience.
We should be taping this and sending it over to the Chamber of Commerce here in Seattle.
Yeah, exactly. I can moonlight as a spokesperson for Seattle's tourism board.
Of Irish tourists just skyrockets. No, I have to agree with you. It's funny because I've lived overseas off and on for more than 20 years, traveled to many places, and like places like Japan, everybody stops off someplace on the way home because they don't want to go home to their little hovel. But I worked for a Swiss company for 4 years, and it was interesting because I was my first time there. I was there for 2 weeks, and every day after work I'd be like, okay, so where's everybody going? And they're like, home.
Yeah.
How can you do that? No, but that's pretty cool. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed your time here. Hey, so tell us. I guess we can kind of talk about what Tynes does, but we can do that in parallel with just talking a little bit about what you're doing and the problems that you solved. But I read through some of the your bio and some of the work you've done, and one of the questions, or comments that you've made is that a lot of security tasks are highly repetitive. Okay. So let's
Yeah.
let's start with there, and then we'll kind of come back in to talk about how Tynes addresses that. Give an example of how these tasks are highly repetitive.
Really, really great question. So I'll start by saying before I founded Tynes, I spent 15 years as a security practitioner, right? So primarily in technical roles like incident response, security operations, security engineering, forensics, malware, compliance, AppSec, you name it. So I'm speaking about this as a from a point of experience rather than just kind of like a marketer looking in. So when I was a security practitioner, my job was to detect, prevent, and respond to cyber attacks against the organizations I was tasked with defending, and that included companies like eBay, PayPal, and, as I said, DocuSign. Um, when we examined the work that we were doing, like forensically, took two steps back and said, like, okay, well, what is the work we're doing and how is it helping the company? We found that about 80% of my team's time was spent doing something they'd already done that day. And that is generally or was generally fairly typical security operations tasks, like, for example, responding to phishing emails or running down EDR alerts or triaging bug bounty reports or validating vuln scans, all that type of work. And so when you look at how a security team operates today, a security operations team specifically, or an incident response team or something like that, largely the way they operate is they have a number of different technologies deployed around their environment, right? And that can be anything from antivirus on endpoints, EDR on servers, WAFs on the edge, IDS on network VLANs, whatever it is. And those tools are all configured to detect malicious behavior or suspicious behavior in some way, shape, or form. Those alerts will generally be sent to some centralized location, right? It could be a SIM, it could be a case management system, it could be Slack, it could be anywhere. And then there's a team of people, or a person, or somebody's responsibility is to investigate those events, those alerts coming from this disparate technology, and make a decision on whether or not that alert is legitimate, whether it's a false positive, and ultimately decide whether or not some sort of remediation work needs to be required. So in the case of an EDR alert, that could be something like, yeah, this is malicious, so I need to quarantine the device. I need to create a ticket for IT for the machine to be re-imaged. I need to investigate what other machines are infected, et cetera, et cetera. But the way teams get to a point, or the way individuals get to a point of being able to say, yes, I can say with confidence, this is a real threat, or no, this is a false positive I can ignore, is the alert goes through some sort of manual enrichment process. And what that means is the alert comes in with a small piece of context. So again, to use the example of EDR, it could be something like, we detected a file on an endpoint, and here's the hash, which we know exists on VirusTotal, right? So what the analyst then needs to do, or the security team needs to do, is add some additional color to that alert. As in, okay, well, how many times has it been seen on VirusTotal, and what do the comments on VirusTotal say? And also, have we seen this piece of malware before in our environment? And also, is that user on holidays? And what role does that user have? And how can I contact their manager? And is this a duplicate? So there's these like long list of steps that need to be performed, primarily manually, in order to get to a point where the analyst can say with confidence, no, this is false positive, it can be ignored, or yes, this is a threat. And so that's just one example, right? That's the EDR alerts. But you can take any type of alert from a security team's environment and kind of apply the same sort of process, right? Alert comes in, it lacks context, a manual process needs to be performed to find that context, and then a decision needs to be made, and then some remediation needs to be taken as well, which is also primarily manual.
Okay. And so what you're, I guess, tasked to do as if you're in a security role like that, is you've got that signal, and you've got to go through all these steps to determine what the actual next step is. Do I need to act on this? Okay. So,
Yep.
how do you, I mean, it sounds like that you pretty much have to go through those steps. And I know that you're probably going to say there's a way to automate it, but how? How can you do that? I mean, I obviously, you could set tolerances on certain things. If you know, if X plus Y equals this, then we're going to enact this policy, etc. But tell me how you're dealing with it.
Yeah. So even before that, like there's probably an argument to be made. Do we have to automate this, right? Like how
Okay.
many alerts are we talking about? Like, is it one a day? Because if it's one a day, that's all right. We can handle that manually. If it's two a day, okay, we can probably handle that manually as well. But like 79% of security teams are overwhelmed by the number of alerts or events that they receive, right? So straight away, you have to do something, right? We have to figure out some way to reduce the burden on these teams. The way you traditionally do something like this, even outside of security, right? Like let's say there's some manual process that needs to be automated. A lot of times the way you do it is you write custom software, right? So you hire a software engineer to come in and write you a script or a piece of code that will talk to these various tools, collect the context from them, and ultimately make a decision on what needs to be done and when. The challenge is that most security teams do not possess the kind of software engineering skills required to build that custom software, right? It just doesn't exist. Engineering resources, software engineering resources are the scarcest resource in enterprises today, bar none, right? There's no resource that's as scarce in an enterprise than software engineering. And companies that do have software engineering resources, they're kind of reluctant to dedicate the cycles required to go and automate some manual security process. And let's be honest, the way things are changing so quickly in security and the way new technologies and tools are being deployed, even if you do write a piece of software that solves the problem today, it's going to get out of date really, really quickly, right? It's because something will change. There'll be a new technology. There'll be a new threat. There'll be a new type of malware. There'll be a new TTP being leveraged by, a state actor or whatever it is. And so the custom software piece isn't really an option for most security teams. And so that leaves you with like, okay, well, how can we achieve the outcomes of custom software without having to use software engineers, right? Like that's the real question. And so when we started to look at this problem in Tynes, what we were trying to build was a platform, a solution that would allow people who didn't know how to write code automate the repetitive manual tasks, regardless of technology case, objective, or complexity, right? That's what we were trying to build. So a tool that would allow frontline practitioners, people that knew their jobs inside out, give them the tools that they needed to automate their own repetitive workflows. Because from our experience, and I'm sure you've probably seen the same throughout your career, automation is only effective. And I mean only effective when it's implemented by people on the front line, right? It's got to be the people doing the work day in, day out who are empowered with the tools they need to automate their workflows end to end. That's when the magic actually happens. And so what we've done with Tynes is essentially build a platform that does just that, right? We've built this tool that allows people who don't have software engineering backgrounds, who don't know how to write code, we've given them the tools and the platform that they need to automate their own workflows any way they want to do it.
So walk me through, we'll talk about the underlying technology in a second, but walk me through the user case of this, this security engineer who's faced with all this signal and they have to go through all these repetitive tasks all day long. And now Tynes is an option for them. But they're not coders. They just want to kind of set this up in a super easy way. How do they do it? What's the process?
As in, how does someone get started with Tynes?
Yeah, I mean, like, so I'm the guy, and I'm not a developer because those are the super, I'm a security engineer, and I just need to automate this. I'm on the front lines. Now I've got Tynes as, so what does it look like for me?
Yeah, really, really good question. So philosophically speaking, when we founded the company, we had been security practitioners, and so one of the things we really wanted to do when we were building this company was be the security vendor that we wished we could have worked with when we were practitioners. Right? We've all worked with like tasteless security vendors who have opaque pricing, make it really difficult to get started on their product, et cetera, et cetera. So we really wanted to be that kind of practitioner focused security vendor. And so the way you get started with Tines is really, really easy. So we provide a free version of the product that anybody can use. You just sign up with your email address. It takes about 10 seconds to get started with Tines, and you have access to the platform. No credit cards required, no need to talk to a sales team, no need to sign your life away. You just get started. It's really easy to try out the product, and it's a fully featured version of the tool that allows you automated a handful of use cases, allow you to get started and try out the product and so on. So as an analyst, you sign up for the product at Tines.com, and you're essentially brought to a platform that looks and feels very familiar if you've used tools like Visio or other whiteboarding applications like Miro or OmniGraffle or something like that. The way Tines works is you drag and drop these what we call action types, and you connect them together, right? So let's say the process that you have is to receive phishing emails, analyze the attachments, and create a ticket in Jira, right? Something really simple and kind of straw man like that. What you would do is you would drag one of these building blocks onto what we call the storyboard. It's the canvas. You would drop it in and you configure it, and that would receive the emails. The next thing you would do then is drag in the next building block, which would be something like pull out the attachments.
Just lost you.
Hear me, Mark?
There we are. You're back. You said something about attachments. Pull in the attachments.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So you would drag the attachments or the building block onto the canvas, connect that up to analyze the attachments. And then for the final step, you would drag on another building block, configure to create a ticket in Jira, and you would connect them together. So it's this kind of like very visual drag and drop interface that allows you to start small, get a couple of things working, and then slowly iterate, make your process more complex and more real world over time. But the actual the way you interact with the platform is there's no code required. You literally just drag these things and you can visualize your process in a really, really simple, straightforward way.
Okay, so I get that now. So you're saying, hey, here's my typical process. Instead of me taking this email and copying it into a ticketing system and so on, it's just going to automatically flow there.
Correct.
But then in terms of I guess the recommended action step, go, no go, or investigate further. Are you able to build that into the automation as well, so that if the signal hits 70% probable, then we're going to go one more level, but if not, we call it a false positive? I mean, how does that all play in?
Absolutely. So if you think about what we've done, our great innovation, right? What we wanted to do was build this platform that would allow anyone automate any process. And
Right.
those processes can be extraordinarily complex, right? They can go to like 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 individual steps. It can
Wow.
have like multitudes of decisions. It can involve like logic right across the board. What we needed to do was figure out a way to build this platform that would allow people construct those workflows that were exceptionally complicated, handle all kinds of gnarly edge cases, talk to a million different technologies. But we also knew we had to make it extremely simple to use, right? Really, really simple, so that anybody, literally anybody, could use this product. And so we had to come up with a very different approach to the way automation platforms work in general, not just SOAR platforms. And so what we started to do when we first founded the company and we're trying to figure out how to build this tool was we went to all our friends and we said, hey, tell me about your workflows. And so we collected documents from Confluence that described vulnerability management. We captured images of whiteboards that showed how companies do employee onboarding. We captured like voice notes of people telling us how they do bug bounty, right? So we collected 500 of these workflows when we were getting started. And what we did was we broke those workflows, regardless of the complexity, regardless of the use case, into their individual steps, right? So when you think about a process, it's really just a long series of steps, a series of actions, right? Receive email, analyze attachments, create tickets. It's just these series of actions. Our bet was that there was a lowest common denominator of actions that we would need to be able to support, right? There had to be a defined set of things that we would need to be able to support in order to be able to automate anything, right? And so when we collected all these individual workflows and we broke them into their individual steps, we started looking for recurring actions, right? So what we were able to do was we were able to say, oh, it's really common to need to be able to read an email, or it's really common to need to be able to talk to some external tool, or in your case, it's really common to need to be able to make a decision. And that decision can be, oh, the probability that this is a high severity is 70, or it can be something like this person is a VP, or it can be something like today's a Tuesday, right? Some sort of decision. What we discovered was there's actually only 7 types of actions that we needed to be able to support to automate any process, any process. So the way Times works is you decide what you want to automate and you build it using just these 7 action types, these 7 primitives. So once you know how to configure these 7 primitives, you can automate any process start to finish. Doesn't matter the technology, doesn't matter the use case, doesn't matter the complexity. It's always just these 7 things configured in slightly different ways. What that means is we can tell our customers, look, once you know how to configure these 7 things, you're essentially as effective as a senior software engineer, right? You will be able to move faster than a senior software engineer. You'll be able to build technology that's as robust and redundant as that built by a senior software engineer. And because we take care of all the messiness like version control, security, credential management, scalability, etc., all your end users need to know is how to configure these 7 things. And one of those 7 things, those 7 primitives, is specifically designed just for making decisions. And so anytime you need to make a decision based on information that's been collected before or on an alert coming in, you just drag that building block, the decision-making building block, onto your process and connect it into wherever you need the decision to be.
And then that decision making building block, I'm assuming it has different settings or different options, different kind of, you can say, like you said, if it's a Tuesday, if this person's a VP, if they are accessing, if there's some type of anomalous behavior that you want to flag or something like that, that the logic will allow you to dictate what the next step in the automation chain would be.
Absolutely right. You got it.
Whew, got it. Okay. So can you give me an example? Because I really think that, I mean, what you're describing sounds super cool, helpful, needed, very much needed. But I also think that the final step in the remediation process, oftentimes it's a judgment call by that security engineer. Because they look at all the different signal and then they say, but could you just give me an example? It could be a simple one of a automated remediation action. And I'm talking about at the end of the chain. We've gone through all the process and now it's time to actually, hey, we need to get this person's device or we need to, take them off the network, whatever it is.
Yep. Wonderful question. So you're right. The remediation is actually where the magic happens. That's how the company gets more secure. That's how the company stays out of like the headlines related to breaches. And so what Times really does is it talks to your best in breed point solutions. So for example, most security teams, or the average security team, has access to about 75 different tools, right? That's up from 55 2 years ago. We've got some customers with over 150 individual technologies. And so the way remediation takes place, it'll actually be performed by those target tools, those best in breed solutions. At Times just instructs that platform what to do. So to give you an example, let's say you receive an alert from a tool like Lacework, right, which is configured to monitor all your cloud assets. And Lacework determines, hey, we've discovered that an S3 bucket is open to the internet. That alert would go to Times. Times would find out a bunch of information related to the alert, whether it's from Okta or AWS itself. And eventually you would have enough context to be able to say, okay, in the event that all these checks have passed and there's no situation where this is not a serious security incident, I'm going to tell the AWS API to restrict access to that bucket. So I'm going to flip that bucket from public to private. So that's like a really, really common one we see our customers do. Another really common could be something like we detect ransomware on an endpoint, right? Mm-hmm. So an EDR tool has flagged a suspicious binary or something like that. Times will go through all the steps to determine that, yeah, you know what, this is actually really bad. And Times works at wire speed, so it's going to do these steps really, really quickly. And then it's going to instruct Sentinel-1, cut this machine off from the internet. Don't let it propagate. Don't let any data be exfiltrated.
That's pretty cool. Hey, so
Yeah.
so how on if we look under the hood a little bit, how can Tines interact with up to 100 different tools and applications that your customers are already using?
Yeah, great question. So this actually gets to one of our most important differentiators, but as a product, but also as a company, right? We think that security, in fact, we know that security teams are dealing with the most fractured stack of any team in the enterprise, right? An average of 75 tools. If you think about these tools, like automation tools in general, what they do is they take data from one place, manipulate it in some way, and put it somewhere else. Right? I'm not doing us a disservice by saying that, but that's really what we're doing. And as a result, these tools like Tines really live and die on their ability to interact with external tools. The way every other platform works today, everyone, not just security automation platforms, is that in order to talk to external tools, they rely on pre-built integrations. You can call it an integration, a module, a plugin, whatever. It's some part of the product that the vendor builds to allow you to talk to external tools. So that could be, for example, an integration for Splunk, an integration for CrowdStrike, an integration for Nessus. It doesn't really matter. It's something that's pre-built. The problem with that model is that by design, you are restricted to what you can automate interaction with by the apps, plugins, modules, integrations that your platform of choice provides.
And you need to keep those plugins updated and
absolutely right, updated, patched, bug-free, and as a result, there's often a backlog, right? So you are bottlenecked by your automation vendor, which should never be the case. And we knew we never wanted to get into a position where we would be a constraint to people using our platform. And so the way we've approached it is in a very, very different way. So instead of relying on this idea of pre-built integrations, we provide a really easy, user-friendly way to talk to any tool that has an API. So one of the 7 building blocks in Tines is specifically designed just for talking to APIs, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a commercial off-the-shelf tool like Splunk. It doesn't matter if it's something you built yourself. It doesn't even matter if it's a security tool. Tines treats it in a consistent way out of the box. What that means is our end users are never restricted to what they can automate interaction with by Tines. The second they go and buy a new platform, if it has an API, and it can be REST, SOAP, GraphQL, whatever, Tines will work with it out of the box in a consistent way. And so, often our customers will ask us, hey, do you integrate with tool XYZ? And we'll be like, does it have an API? Because if it does, then yes, absolutely. And instead of us spending all our engineering resources building these apps that are already out of date the second we ship them, what we do is work on improving the ergonomics of this single building block, making it more powerful, more robust, easier to discover APIs, and so on.
So if I'm using your API building block, I forget, you said there's seven. Yes. What was the phrase you used? 7 core
action types.
Action types, and one of them involves, I guess, using the API to talk to these other apps. Describe to me that process? Because I'm a security engineer, again, I'm a coder. I just want to get this up and running. How does that work?
Great question. So the way it would work is you need to configure the building block in Tine, the action type in Tines, to talk to your target tool. So what you would do is you would enter the URL for that target tool. And that could be something like jira.atlassian.net or api.crowdstrike.com, whatever it is. And then you would configure your authentication. So you would say, this is my API key for that service, or this is my username and password for that service. And then you would just send the data that you need to send to that tool, right? So if it's a request to quarantine a device in CrowdStrike, you would send the host ID to the CrowdStrike API.
Lost you again.
Oh, sorry, Mark, gone again?
No. You said, okay, CrowdStrike API.
Yeah, so you can talk directly to the CrowdStrike API. Now, the benefit of this is that obviously the flexibility that you have, the number of tools you can talk to. the barrier to entry becomes that as a security engineer, you need to have some familiarity with APIs, right?
Yeah.
So the way we get around that is that we provide what we call pre-built templates. And these templates are pre-configured actions that allow you to talk to, like 250 different security tools in 3,000 different ways. So chances are, if you want to do something that's anyway common, like to create a search in Splunk, we actually have a template for that ready to go. So you don't have to worry about looking up the API documentation, etc.
That is awesome. Hey, you've sold me on this idea because I'm not very technical myself, and it sounds like it would be a great tool to use and make my life a heck of a lot easier. Let me ask you. Let me switch tracks yet again here. Tell me a little bit about your business, where it's at. What stage you're at, and your plans for expansion and growth.
Oh, great question. So we're nearly 4 years old. So I founded the company in early 2018. Like I said, having spent about 15 years as a security practitioner. We were bootstrapped and self-funded for the first couple of years of our existence. Myself and my co-founder, we raised $15 million in VC funding from some of the world's best investors in kind of 2019. And we have invested heavily in go-to-market, product development, R&D since then. So today we're nearly 100 people spread across the world, kind of split 50-50 between the US and Europe. We get to work with some of the world's most incredible security teams, right? Everything from Fortune 5s like McKesson to public and private SaaS companies like MongoDB, GitLab, and folks like that, right through to 50 people startups. We also, in that free version of the product I mentioned, the community edition, we've had about 5,000 companies sign up for the free version of our product. We're growing faster than we've ever grown before. So we're about 100 people today. We'll be close to 250 by the end of the year. We think that this market is just getting started. Right? We think we're really in the early innings of the security automation space. We're working with some incredible companies that are doing some incredible things, but our mission and our vision remains to be that company we wish we could have worked with, to take a very much a practitioner's approach to the problems that we're solving, and ultimately to make all our customers successful and to continue building a product that our customers love to use.
I mean, the companies that you work for tend to be on the very large size, and security operations for large MNCs obviously are different than from mid-sized companies and then even from SMBs. Do you think that you have a sweet spot in terms of the target company size?
Yeah, so we definitely have an ideal customer profile, and that is typically kind of like companies of over 500 people that have invested in mostly cloud-first technologies like G Suite, O365, Slack, Lacework, Hunters, CrowdStrike, Panther, etc. They're the companies where we see ourselves having the best fit. But that's not to say we don't work with other folks, right? We've got a bunch of companies that have like 50 people or less. We've got a bunch of companies who are using the free version of our product who don't even have a dedicated security team, right? There's one IT person and he's tasked with security. And so he's using, or he or she is using the tool to like automate the repetitive parts of their jobs. But for the most part, it's kind of like that technology cloud native company that's like 500 or so employees that have invested in cloud native technologies.
That totally makes sense from where I sit because again, larger companies, more resources, smaller companies, you have typically fewer people trying to do everything. And sometimes it's one person doing everything. And maybe security is just one part of their job. And anything that you can help them, anything you can do to help them automate, make their life easier would, I guess, be greatly appreciated. So definitely makes sense. Well, hey, Eoin, last question. I'm looking at your background here. The audience won't be able to see it, but I just see nothing but books, lots and lots of books. Is that a real background, or is that is that your real background?
Yeah, when you said background, I thought you were talking about like my work history.
Oh no,
like, lots of books.
I found some interesting things in your background there. No, I'm just talking about.
Yeah. You're referring to that time I like interned in a library or something. No, this is my real background, Mark. As your listeners will no doubt have gathered, I need all the help I can, like seeming intelligent. So surrounding myself in books and bookshelves does a good job of that.
It's that power of osmosis. So do you have any recommendations?
I'm just after finishing an amazing book that I really, really enjoyed. It's a novel called The Paris Architect.
Okay.
Really, really fun novel. It's like the premise is that there's this kind of architect in France in Nazi Germany, and he is a bit of kind of like a self-serving, very commercially focused guy, and doesn't really have a whole lot of empathy for the plight of the Jewish people in like Nazi Germany. But he is tasked with this concept of building hiding places as an architect, building hiding places for rich Jewish people in apartments and houses in France. And it's just this really interesting premise, but also kind of like the character development over the course of the novel is really, really interesting. But I won't spoil it for your listeners.
No, that I like new things like that. I mean, I'll definitely check it out. I just I finished a book called The Hail Mary Project, which was written by the same person who wrote The Martian, and it's it's obviously sci-fi. And I don't want to give too much away, but it was a kind of quite unusual, kind of feel good, funny sci-fi. And just
Like
so it had
Andy Weir or something.
exactly, exactly, yeah. It had me laughing quite a few times, and so which is nice because usually with sci-fi it can go deep down to rabbit holes unless you get into something like Hitchhiker's Guide or something like that. No, this is a good book. Hey, well. Eoin, I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've sold me on the concept of Tines 100%. It's definitely needed. The market will appreciate it. And I'd like to wish you and the rest of the Tines team a very successful 2022.
Mark, same to you. Keep doing what you're doing, my friend. Talk soon.
Cheers. Thanks.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.